here at KDK-TV. We're with Senator Jay Costa, the Democratic leader of the Pennsylvania State Senate, and the only senator from this region who has a contested primary on June 2nd. Senator Costa, thank you very much for being with me.
Happy to be with you, John.
Senator, you come from a family, the Costa family, that has deep roots in Allegheny County and in Democratic politics. Could you review for us quickly the history of your involvement in politics here in Allegheny County?
Sure, John. Thank you. I think public service has been a part of what our family has been about for many, many decades. My own personal journey started when I worked as a deputy sheriff in Allegheny County, going out as a surrogate speaker for Sheriff Gene Kuhn, and later becoming Allegheny County Register of Wills, and then moving on to the Senate, where I've had the opportunity to serve in a variety of capacities. First as Judiciary Chairperson for a number of years, working with Senator Stuart Greenleaf, and then as the Appropriations Chairperson in the Senate, and now more recently, the last several years, as a Democratic leader in the Senate.
You know, you're in a position very much like Congressman Mike Doyle, who we interviewed recently, seniority. Does seniority count for this region? Does it mean something for the people here in this area?
I think seniority matters if you're able to be in a position of influence. And I think I've been able to garner support of my colleagues from around the state to serve in really important positions that I mentioned. As Appropriations Chairperson, the first time we had that position here in the western part of the state in about 30 years. Then as Democratic leader, similarly, having the opportunity to be part of the framing and the shaping of policy and the development of things here going on in the Pittsburgh and Allegheny County region. So it does matter. Longevity does matter. But also has to be tied with positions of influence as it relates to the position, for example, that I hold as Democratic leader or previously held as Appropriations Chairperson.
I will note that this region has had four top leaders at the same time, if I'm remembering correctly. Well, maybe it's down to three now, in terms of the Republican leader of the Speaker of the House from this region, the Democratic House leader, and yourself. Do you view that as really important for this area?
I do view it as important. It gives our region a voice at the table in terms of negotiating, certainly negotiating one of the principal things that we need to do, and that is our budget. So it gives us a voice there to ensure that we're making appropriate investments in Western Pennsylvania. On policy matters, it allows us to bring the voice and the thoughts and the ideas and the concerns of the people of our region to the table to negotiate those type of policy matters as well. So it does make a difference. We don't want folks from other parts of the state making decisions with respect to the issues that are important to us. We want to have the ability to have a voice at that table. And I think that's what I bring in my position as Democratic leader.
You know, your opponent and others will say you're just part of the old boys school down there in Harrisburg. How do you answer the argument that you're just really part of the establishment?
Well, we are not part of just the establishment. I take very seriously the work that I do as a state senator. I've listened to the folks in our district, and I try to bring their issues and their values to Harrisburg as it relates to legislation that I work on, measures that I advance, and I've advanced a lot of measures on behalf of our region and fought for a number of areas like healthcare and gun safety measures and the environment, education funding and criminal justice reform. Those are just a handful of the areas that I've heard from folks here in my district, in our district, that I brought to Harrisburg. So it's not necessarily being part of the old boys network. It's about bringing the issues to the people you represent to Harrisburg and put them at the forefront of the conversation.
Senator, what are you proudest of in terms of the work you've done for your district in Harrisburg?
I think there's a couple of places, John. I think one of the things that I take great pride in is the ability to bring back resources to make investments in our communities, in our neighborhoods, and working with so many community groups and organizations to foster development and redevelopment. Some of the other policy matters that I'm proud of is the work that I did working with the city of Pittsburgh to help turn around its finances a number of years ago. But also some of the specific things that I've done. Healthcare has always been a big issue, and I was at the forefront and majorly involved, as you know, John, working on the Highmark UPMC dispute, trying to bring a resolution and encouraging those folks to bring that matter to allow folks the opportunity to have access to health care, be able to make their choices along those lines. Very specific things I've worked on, for example, the establishment at the Catholic Charities Health Center, helping to be able to establish that with the resources to get that up and running, to provide free health care as a clinic to so many people in our region. Also looking at some of the criminal justice reform measures that I had passed. For example, we had an issue with respect to our the composition of our juries and not looking like the folks who were participating in our criminal justice system. I changed the law here in Pennsylvania to ensure that we had more diversity within our jury pools. Court interpreters, making sure that court interpreters had standards. A variety of other measures, John, that I can go on. Working with the city with respect to the lead pipes and lead lines, being able to drive significant resources there, but also changing the law to allow private laterals to be part of the expense that's bared by the municipality or the authority. Just a handful or a glimpse of some of the things that we've done.
As you know, in the last election, you had relatives who lost re-election in the primaries to, frankly, candidates who argued they were more progressive, more liberal in the Democratic Party. How do you view this election? Do you see yourself as a moderate Democrat, a progressive Democrat? Does it matter in the end?
John, I don't know if it matters at the end. I think what's important is if you look at the issues that I stand for, those are issues that I think that are typically in the moderate to the liberal progressive phase. My role in environmental changes that need to be done, I guess what you would say would be in the liberal category. If you look at my work, for example, in the criminal justice reform measures that I advanced back in September of 2018, would place it there. Looking at some of the things that we want to do in healthcare, I mean, I would imagine that all those type of things, and my votes on various other matters, but I don't think that the labels matter. I think what matters is if someone is effective in what they do, whether or not they're listening to the constituency. And I think that's something that I've done. I've listened to my constituency and cast the votes which I think were appropriate in accordance with how they wanted me to act, whether it be healthcare, whether it be the environment, whether it be criminal justice reform, whether it be growing jobs, whether it be gun safety measures. All those things I've listened to constituents and advocated on those issues on their behalf.
Senator Costa, last question. How tough is it to campaign for re-election in the middle of a pandemic?
It's been difficult, John. I mean, I think that there's a whole new way of campaigning, certainly. Now we are communicating with voters in a variety of ways, certainly through social media as a big part of that, texting and digital ads and the like, all those type of things, and phone calls are what we're doing, and direct mail pieces, of course, is part of that. But it's very difficult, particularly in this timeline where we have a lot of other concerns that folks have, and for several weeks, the elections and primary elections weren't at the forefront of their mind. As we get down to the last couple of weeks, we will ramp up our engagement with voters in the ways I mentioned, but it's much more difficult. My preference would be to be able to go out in the evenings, on the weekends, and knock on a door and have a conversation with folks at their door. We know we can't do that. We've done it in the past. I know it works, but we're now communicating directly with the people who are accessing the vote by mail as well.
Well, finally, let me give you the last 30 seconds to reach out to your fellow Democrats. Why should they vote to renominate you, re-elect you on June 2nd?
Well, first and foremost, John, it's been a privilege to represent the 43rd District in Harrisburg and in our community. I believe I've represented the values of the people that we represent, and I've worked closely with community leaders and leaders, elected leaders, and so many others to get a feel for what's important to them. The issues that I talked about were healthcare, and we'll continue to talk about that at the forefront. Continued investments in education, working in the environmental space, looking to do criminal justice reform, gun safety measures, all those things. And then more importantly, right now, as I continue to operate as a state senator for this district, dealing with COVID-19 and the situation and the impact it's had in our communities and across our Commonwealth. Certainly the health of our individuals it's important, but also how we properly phase in our economy, making sure we do it thoughtfully and smartly and on the advice of our health officials. Those are some of the reasons why I think I hope I've earned the continued support of the voters of our district.
Senator Jay Costa, always a pleasure to be with you. Thank you, sir, very much for your time today.
Thank you, John.
We are with Bill Britton, a Democrat who is running for the Democratic nomination for state senator in the 43rd Senatorial District. Mr. Britton is running against the incumbent state senator, Jay Costa. Mr. Britton, thank you, sir, very much for being with me today.
Thank you for having me.
So let me ask you, who is Bill Britton? How do you describe yourself, sir?
My name is Bill Britton. I'm the owner of Shadyside Nursery, which is a plant nursery and construction company based in the city of Pittsburgh. I'm a 10-year volunteer for Big Brothers and Big Sisters, and I'm a member of the Pennsylvania Farmers Union.
And you are pretty much a lifelong resident here in southwestern Pennsylvania. Can you give us a little bit of your history and background and where you live?
I grew up in Franklin Park. I attended the University of Pittsburgh. I have a degree in Russian language and history. And since then, I've kind of built my businesses up and made my life in the city of Pittsburgh. And just recently, I moved out to Forest Hills, which is a borough outside of Wilkinsburg.
Russian language and history.
Yes.
Вы говорите по-русски?
Da.
I won't say too much more because I'll embarrass myself.
Did you study?
I did study a little bit of Russian, and but look, this interview is about you, not me. So let me ask you, if I may. I'm not the candidate. Does Russian history impact the state Senate race in some way? Has it been helpful to you?
No. I've lived in Russia twice. I lived in Tumen, Siberia, and I've also lived in St. Petersburg. But in general, I am a curious and studious person. I like to know how the world works. And I would say that learning a language, particularly one as difficult as Russian, which I did for 5 years, I have a good ability to learn new information and accept these kind of how the world works and try and put that into my personal life to be successful.
Well, having taken Russian for 2 years, I have incredible respect for anybody who can learn a new language, as you say, particularly one as difficult as Russian. So let me ask you the most important question. Why do you want to be a state senator from the Pittsburgh area?
So as a small business owner, I deal a lot with the state, and particularly with the farmers union. I was dealing a lot with how small farms were being pushed out by industrial agricultural outfits from out of state, particularly based in California and on the West Coast in general. And actually what I did was I went through a lot of campaign finance records, and I was able to see the amount of money that was flooding into politicians' coffers, both Republicans and Democrats. And it really shocked me. You know, I don't dream of being a politician. This is something that I did as a citizen to stand up to a system that I really feel like has the proverbial boot on the throat of the normal person. And I felt like somebody should run.
Do you have any specific complaints about Senator Costa's performance as an incumbent for many, many years? He's now been there for a number of years.
I do. I think that Senator Costa and me both agree on a lot of issues, particularly on how he has voted. But I'm kind of pushing for the future of the Democratic Party, which is a young, aggressive party of young people that could succeed and could take over the state government, which I know has held back a lot of progress, particularly from Senator Costa. But I do think that one of the main issues is the way that the wealthy and the powerful have manipulated our political system. We continually have policy that refuses to address the most pressing issues in our state, and I believe that's for a reason. These companies and these people donate money to politicians because they get results. It's not out of the goodness of their heart. And I do believe as a citizen that is fundamentally what is holding our society back from actually moving forward. I believe that the average person agrees with me that these changes should happen, but they just are never able to happen.
Are you essentially saying that Senator Costa is in the clutches of big business?
To a degree, yes. I mean, I think you can look at his campaign finance records. You can see money from Walnut Capital, U.S. Steel, various unions. And I do believe that affects how policy works, particularly on how he votes. I do think that he has done the best he can in an existing system, and I recognize that. But I think that that system is the problem. And even though I do agree with Senator Costa in a lot of ways, if we don't address the system, we're never going to fix this.
You know, I guess he would argue that there is value in seniority in Harrisburg. Having been around a while, he can have a greater impact on this region. Do you agree or disagree with that? Or do you think that these other factors outweigh seniority?
I think with any change, there are pros and cons. And his seniority argument is very good. He is the head of the Democratic Party. I mean, he makes very valid points. But there's also the flip side of that. I mean, he's very entrenched in a system, and it has worked the way that he has helped make it work for the past 24 years. And I don't think that is the way forward. You know, and any sort of change is going to be rough in the beginning, and you have, so to speak, you have to jump off the bridge to try something new. I am merely offering an alternative to people out there, an idea that we don't have to operate our political system the way we do.
How has it been, Mr. Britton, campaigning during a pandemic like this? How do you get your message across to people?
It's been very difficult, and it has not been what I expected. Owning a small business, I'm used to dealing with people face to face, so I anticipated to get on the ballot, I knocked on 5,000 doors personally. And I anticipated doing another 5 or 10,000 just to do that, but that obviously wasn't possible with COVID-19. So we've done the best we could on social media. My business has a fairly large presence in this part of the city, so I continue to kind of adapt that to COVID and hope that that translated to the campaign. But inevitably, I've done the best I can with what we have.
Is it through social media?
Yes, mostly through social media. That's the only way it works. And doing signage also. But I mean, the traditional way of campaigning, such as door knocking and canvassing, has really gone out the window.
Are there a specific issue or two? You've mentioned sort of the campaign finance, the big money in politics, the establishment focus of Harrisburg. But is there anything in particular on issues, you know, like climate change or social justice or economic reform? Are there anything in specific that you would like to focus on if you were elected to the Senate?
I think the primary thing that I would focus on is criminal justice reform. I'm an advocate for ending the drug war, marijuana legalization. I'm also against continuing the fossil fuel infrastructure build out, such as giving a tax break to another cracker plant like HB 1100 did. One of my biggest problems and what's driven me to this point is poorly thought out policy. I don't know if you're familiar with the medical marijuana program in this state, but that all that money was basically absorbed by multinational companies when that could have been used to prop up small businesses and small farms. You talk about even the charter school policy that passed in '96. You know, why didn't that limit the amount of charter schools as a tester? And we wouldn't be in the position we're in 30 years from now. And that's kind of where I'm at on all of this. Is it seems to me that either this policy is poorly thought out or it's insidious, that people are making sure that it has loopholes to enlarge it in the way they want. And I think our legislators should be doing a better job of putting a stopgap measure on these things to make sure new policies are thought out and actually benefit all of us.
May I ask, Mr. Britton, how old you are?
I'm 38 years old.
Some would say that's not that young. Some would say that's very young, I think, depending on where you are.
I like to think it's young, but I'm holding on to it.
Do you think that we need more younger people in government? Would that make a difference?
I do, and I think there's a generational gap between people a few years older than me and younger and those of Costa's age. We definitely feel like we're bearing the brunt of the COVID-19 and the recession from 2008, and our futures seem a lot more precarious than somebody does your age. And I think for us, the only way to solve that is more radical policy. And I think that's an age difference, not a Republican or Democratic difference. If I talk to a Republican my age, they see the same way I do on a lot of these issues: to save money, to change the way our society operates, to try and boost up the poor. I mean, the reality is, whatever percentage of it, there's a large percentage of people that can't even afford a $400 bill. Like, we cannot go forward as a baseline.
You know, finally, if I could ask you, Mr. Britton, let me give you 30 seconds. Make your pitch to the Democratic voters in the 43rd Senatorial. Why should they vote for you on June 2nd, or frankly, through the mail right now?
My pitch is that I think that Jay Costa has done a good job, but it is time for a change. We need to fundamentally address who has the power and the economics in our system, or we're never going to change anything. And just because a politician is liberal on social issues, if they are not willing to confront who has the money and the power and perpetuates the status quo, we are not going to change anything.
Well, Bill Britton, candidate for the Democratic nomination in the 43rd Senatorial District, thank you, sir, very much for taking time with me today. It's been a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you.
I want to know who we're running from.
I do not know.
If you go out